ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and valued members of NCIA. Welcome to episode 3 of our vape-focused Industry Essentials webinar series, all brought to you by NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing Committee. I'm Brian Gilbert, and I'm thrilled to be your host for this enlightening session today, entitled Committee Insights, where risk assessment integrity meets policy. As the cannabis and hemp sectors continue to experience unprecedented growth, the importance of product safety and integrity cannot be understated. Our webinar today is designed to provide industry professionals, policymakers, and stakeholders with the knowledge and insights necessary to navigate the complex landscape of risk assessment, compliance, and policy development. Today, we have a distinguished panel of experts, including regulators, hardware and product manufacturers, toxicologists, and legal professionals, all who will guide us through a comprehensive exploration of that critical intersection of risk assessment, integrity, and policy. We'll delve into key topics outlined, such as ingredient risk assessment, the balance of regulations versus innovation, due diligence for new products, and much, much more. Each of our experts will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience in our discussion today, and we're in for a truly enlightening session. So let's dive into this critical conversation about risk assessment, integrity, and policy within the cannabis and hemp industries. As always, please remember that your questions and engagement are highly valued throughout this webinar, so feel free to use the public chat room and the Q&A features to interact directly with our panelists. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and let's make this session both informative and engaging. With that, I'll turn it over to our moderator for today's session, Darwin Millard, the Spock of Cannabis, the Chief Science Officer at Final Bell, the Subcommittee Chair of ASTM International D3708 on personal and household usage and devices, as well as, and last but not least, the Chair Emeritus of NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing Committee. Darwin will be kicking things off by turning it over to the panel to introduce themselves and be leading the conversation from there. So with that, I'll turn it right over to you, Darwin, to kick things off.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it. Today, I'm super excited. I get to take a step back and let some other people talk. So this will be a good one. So in episode 2, we just scratched the surface of really contemplating risk by asking the panelists their opinions about non-cannabinoid ingredient selection. In that case, we were talking about terpenes and when we're manufacturing our cannabinoid vape products. But in today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the various approaches to conducting a risk assessment and how this tool can be used by both operators and regulators to the benefit of not only the consumer, but also our industry as a whole. So with that, I'd love to give an opportunity for our panelists to introduce themselves and let you all know why they're here today. And I'll kick it over to Shauna from True Terpenes to give us and introduce herself.
Thanks, Darwin. Hey, everyone. I'm Dr. Shauna Vriki from True Terpenes. Here at True Terpenes, we create flavor ingredients that can go into cannabinoid products. I do toxicology risk assessments of all of the ingredients that we use. And throughout that work, I've also been able to assist lobbyists, lawmakers, regulators, attorneys for science-backed research on the safety of cannabinoid products.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shauna. And Raza, please go right ahead, sir.
Hey everyone, great to be here and to see you all. I'm an attorney at Zuber Lawler in Los Angeles. We're a law firm with about 50 lawyers around the country, and we work on all areas of cannabis-related law. I've been working as a lawyer in the cannabis industry since 2009. Originally, I mostly represented medical marijuana collective and cooperative members in state and federal criminal courts across California. And when the licensing started, I started helping a lot of people who'd been involved in those collectives and cooperatives to transition into the new licensed and heavily regulated industry and adjusting to this whole new set of risks and legal landscape. Today, I do a lot of regulatory advising, a lot of litigation involving cannabis businesses, work on intellectual property matters, and also various contracts and deals in the cannabis industry. And I've been working with people in the cannabis industry and regulators now consistently for many years. I find it a really fascinating industry to work in, especially with the conflict between the state and the federal laws and the quickly changing laws. But I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks again for inviting me.
Appreciate it, Raza. Looking forward to your legal perspectives. James, kicking it over to yourself, sir.
Hi, everybody. I'm James Granger. Glad to be back here again in this webinar series. I am the political officer for a venture capital group called Clientele Capital Group. We represent and own a number of brands, primarily the multi-state brand The Clear. We produce vaporizer devices, infused joints, gummies, etc. And also, I'm the head of the Cannabis Vaporization Industry Association. Prior to this, I've been running operations and product development in the space for about 12 years and very passionate on this topic and very glad to be here chatting with everybody today. Thank you.
Thanks, James, so much. And over to Josh.
Thanks, Darwin. Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Borden. Good to meet you all. I'm the head of product at Green Tank. And in my role at Green Tank, I oversee a variety of different, product-related functions. So everything from, product management to design, engineering, validation, and ultimately post-launch support and success. For those who aren't familiar with Green Tank, we are a vaporizer manufacturer, primarily working with companies in the cannabis space, but also working with some other folks outside of cannabis as well. And like everyone else said, excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. Josh, sorry about that. And last but not least, Jillian, please, thank you so much for your time today and being willing to provide us with your perspectives. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, Jillian Schauer, Executive Director of the Cannabis Regulators Association. We're a nonpartisan association of government agencies from 43 states, DC, 2 territories in Canada. We convene governments to help share best practices and emerging practices in regulation in this space. We're not an advocacy group. I have a PhD in behavioral science and a master in public health and worked in tobacco control policy for about 15 years before jumping over to cannabis policy around 2012 when my home state of Washington legalized. So worked with regulators through the vaping lung injury outbreak. This is a super important topic, and I'm glad to see the discussion that NCIA is convening around this.
Absolutely. This will certainly be a great discussion. So with that, I know it's going to be hard. So I'm gonna try to challenge you all to stick to like maybe one area specifically related to your avenue or aspect of the industry, but don't feel pigeonholed to just that. But I'd really like to know, what are different ways of approaching risk assessments for vape product manufacturers? Or, to put it another way, what are those some of the areas that pose potential risks to business operators in the cannabinoid vape product space? And I'd like to understand that from each of your perspectives. And maybe, Jillian, you could kick us off with some of those regulatory perspectives.
Yeah, and I'll probably open the door to topics that the rest of the panelists will drill down further in. So I think the risks that regulators are considering, especially in the wake of the vaping lung injury outbreak, additives and ingredients, there's been a whole webinar about that already, but excipients, diluents, terpenes, what do they do when they're aerosolized? What proportion is okay in products? What sources are okay? I'll talk a little bit later about the approaches that states are using to sort of assess that, and it does vary and it's imperfect. So I think there's an onus on the industry to go beyond where regulations are here. Hardware, the heating elements, the temperature controls, is the product actually touching that? I'll talk a lot more about that, but we know leaching is a real issue and temperature can change the dynamics of the ingredients. Shelf life, how long should products be on the shelves? What's safe for consumers? Not every state requires an expiration date, but as an industry, that's really an important standard. And then finally, consumer warnings and notifications and marketing notably that doesn't appeal to youth. So I'm going to get much more into that, but I think those are the top 4 or 5 things that regulators are going to be thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you, Jillian. Well, speaking of hardware, maybe Josh, you could let us know some of your perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. And that's a good kickoff. So speaking, on behalf of Green Tank and from a hardware manufacturing perspective, I think for us, the biggest area sort of risk, that we have to manage on our end, and there's quite a few, but what I would refer to as, post-product delivery and rollout. In our world, we do everything we can in terms of product design, engineering, and making sure that the products that we design and build are really purposely built, right? And they're robust and they work well and consistently. Unfortunately, in our world, though, once we deliver the product, we have very limited control or sort of influence in terms of what goes into the product and how it goes into the product. And those two things, both pose, some interesting challenges and potential risks. And our way of really sort of, trying to deal with that or mitigate that is we work really, really closely hand in hand with all of our customers and brands that we work with to ensure that the oil, the extract that they're putting in the device works well. It's been tested with a variety of different products and specifications to make sure we've got that sort of right, match between the oil, the extract and the hardware. And then also, taking it a step further, we provide very, very detailed SOPs and sort of hands-on support to ensure that things are being filled in the correct way, stored in the correct way, and transported in the correct way. Now, these are obviously all, sort of ideal conditions. And for the most part, brands and customers we work with are very understanding. But there's definitely been, a handful of cases, throughout the years where people, either don't follow it or sort of deliberately, ignore some of the, guidelines or suggestions that we provide. And we've seen that have a direct impact ultimately on product performance. So for us, that's probably the biggest area of risk that we have to try and mitigate and control from our end.
Much appreciated, Josh. Yeah, and speaking of the product manufacturer, maybe James, you could provide us with some perspectives there.
Sure. Josh did a great job getting that started on there. One thing that we look at really seriously, even in the early days of brainstorming a new product flavor situation on that, immediately it starts the risk assessment. Immediately it starts the questions of how are we going to defend and how are we going to show what we're doing is safe and is effective. So the risk assessment really begins at the beginning within our product development. And we work very closely with our providers of hardware, of terpenes, of botanically derived terpenes, those things like that, to make sure that we're all on the same page going forward in product design. Getting this in early saves a lot of headache down the road, a lot of discovery, a lot of thought, and also really in developing a risk assessment, making sure that you have the right minds at the table. There is definitely a space for designing a product for delivery for who's our target customer base, but really having those scientists, those experts, those toxicologists, and those testing labs behind us as we're developing a product leads us to have a solid risk assessment upon every product plenty of time before release, and it's a central part of our process.
Awesome, James. Thank you for that. Speaking of maybe doing some safety analysis on the formulations we're using, Shauna, you could elucidate a little bit from the toxicological perspective, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So toxicology, when we're thinking of toxicology and risk assessment, I like to remind everyone that risk is actually a factor of two things: the inherent hazard of the compound, but also the exposure of the compound. So when I'm looking at risk assessment, I look at each component individually, and then each component gets assigned a unique limit, similar to um, contamination testing for the cannabinoid industry, right? Pesticides all have their own unique limit. Heavy metals have their own unique limit. So when I do risk assessment of ingredients and additives that go into vape products, they each get their own unique limit. So it's really important to remember that everything can cause hazard. Everything is dangerous at a certain level. People have died from drinking too much water at one time. So it's really important to factor the risk with also the consumer access of the product, and not just flat out ban everything, because consumers, utilize these products in all different ways. We still want them to access the products that they like, but access them safely. And then on that side, once the ingredient goes into the hardware, it's really important that the hardware is also working properly. We know metals can leach into it, and so you have to do a risk assessment on how much is being leached at what rate. And then also making sure that it's heating properly and the wicking is efficient, so that we don't do all this work on all the ingredients and additives and, oh great, now the extract is super safe, but then it goes into your hardware and it burns it, and now it's forming toxic carbonyls and other new compounds that we need to be aware of.
Wow, Shauna. Raza, I think your mind is probably the wheels turning right there, and all the legal ramifications that potentially could have on us. So please let us have it.
So it's been interesting in looking at how the legal risks have shifted over time in this industry. The successful people in the cannabis industry have been experts at managing risk for decades now. Still today, everyone involved in this industry is openly and knowingly violating federal laws that have large criminal penalties. But we've all decided that these are manageable risks, and that there's a way to navigate this that makes sense. As the industry has evolved, the approaches to risks have changed over time. The main drivers of these changes have been, first of all, being able to use the court system now to enforce contracts, sue for fraud and theft and so forth. Also, we now have detailed regulations to follow in the industry when we used to have none. And we also don't have the constant worry of criminal prosecutions like we had before. All of that issue still exists with federal illegality. Before the licensed cannabis, everyone was taking large risks, real risks of ending up in the criminal justice system. Some people made a lot of money. Others ended up in prison. People develop patterns and cultures to evade law enforcement, avoid creating incriminating evidence, operate with secrecy. Security has also always been a big concern as well. It still is today, with the large amounts of cash in the industry and the existence still of organized crime in large illicit markets. But what we've seen is that the old approaches to reducing risks can actually increase risk today. You need to have record keeping, whereas before it could incriminate you. You need to do things openly without the secrecy. And the risks have shifted from evading law enforcement to legal compliance, positioning yourself for litigation, setting up the right legal structure in the beginning, having good contracts in place, not just oral agreements or handshake deals like are so common in the industry. And from a legal perspective, the risk assessment really now is document everything before problems arise. Make sure you have policies in place for regulatory compliance and employment law compliance. Make sure you have a training program for managers that's in writing. Make sure you have recall procedures if there's a problem with the product. Make sure your labels and marketing are vetted in advance and are not violating all of these sometimes conflicting and always changing state laws and federal laws on labeling and marketing. Also take the time to get the contracts right to anticipate the problems in court. The idea is you're anticipating a crisis later on, taking steps in advance will protect you and show that you're taking reasonable steps at complying with the law. And just finally, it does help if you involve an attorney early on in the process to help show that you're operating in good faith, trying to do things the right way, have a solid structure in place. And also it's helpful from the beginning to open up the dialogue with the regulators to show that you are operating in good faith and making a reasonable effort to comply. Those steps can really help you down the road if there's a crisis that develops.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Raza. I was really hoping you were going to sprinkle that last one in there, right? With having an open dialogue with your regulators. I couldn't agree more to wow, such a breadth of knowledge. Good thing we're recording this one so people can go back to all of that information. So I really want to let's dive in just a little bit more now and just hardware. Hardware seems to have sparked a bunch of different potential considerations we should be having in regards to risk. And Josh, since you're the hardware manufacturer here, let's pick on you a little bit. And, I'd really like you to expand on your thoughts that you had earlier, right? Let us know a little bit more about how your company addresses risk assessments during your hardware selection.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, for hardware selection, for us and, something that James spoke about really sort of struck a chord with me in terms of, everything for risk starts from the beginning, right? So for us, it really starts at the beginning for the design stage, right? Everything we do is designed and engineered in-house. And we go through a very, very, detailed and robust and lengthy, product development and validation process to make sure that what we're doing, we're checking all the boxes, crossing all of our T's, et cetera, before we ultimately launch something to market. So, for us, kind of in our world, like I said, we start with designing the product. And then immediately we're already starting to sort of vet and work with suppliers overseas, obviously predominantly in Shenzhen, in terms of verifying and validating, hey, does this design work? Is this design going to have any challenges? What are some of the potential sort of risks or downsides, of a potential new design or form factor that we might be working on? And that sort of mentality really kind of carries through the entire stage of product development, right? Every single stage we're going to be testing the various materials to make sure that they're the right appropriate material types, and they're going to provide the performance and the robustness that they need to in the product assembly, and then all the way up to the full product assembly and making sure we're doing the necessary testing there. So, for us, really, it's I gotta say, it's not rocket science when it comes down to it. It's a lot about just doing the due diligence, following our steps very carefully, and making sure that every step of the way along the product design, the engineering, and eventual ramp up to production, we're doing the necessary testing. And that's just, not just at the performance level, but that's also at the material level, robustness, and things of that nature. So from our end, that's kind of where the risk assessment starts. And then, just to elaborate a little bit further, as I mentioned in my first, sort of, I guess, point, talking through what happens once we deliver the product, right? Because there's a lot of risk that we have to manage on our end in terms of working with contract manufacturers, making sure the product gets built the right way to the proper specifications, and then delivered, of course, on time to our customers. And then from there, once again, it really just comes down to being super diligent and working very closely and hand in hand with our customers. One thing, about Green Tank that's unique and really sort of allows us to do some awesome things here is we do have a federal R&D license that's held by Health Canada. And so that allows us to bring in extracts and various different materials from licensed producers and do some really interesting, sort of stress testing as well as end user testing as well. And so as I mentioned before, that's a huge piece in our ability to mitigate risk is let's work with your extract, let's work with your team, make sure we've tested it with a variety of different products and specs to make sure it's got that perfect performance and really kind of balancing the various different variables we can play around with to make sure that you as a customer are happy with the way that it performs and it's going to, delight your customers. So for us, that's kind of it. And then, the last piece that I also spoke to earlier was just, once taking it a step further, once we've selected that extract, the right product specifications, now let's make sure things are being filled in the right way, transported and stored in the right way. And doing all those things together really is ultimately how we help mitigate risk and ensure, good, consistent, high performing products for the end user.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Josh. It sounds like there's a lot of design specifications that go into this process and, creating hardware and selecting components and doing those types of things. And I can only imagine if you've been working with someone and you've created a product that's intended to be used in a certain way, that if that was used improperly by a customer or something like that, that could potentially open up a hardware manufacturer to legal liability. Raza, do you think that's a potential there that hardware manufacturers should be concerned about?
In hardware manufacturers, I think one of the big issues is carefully vetting and monitoring your suppliers to ensure the quality and the safety of the materials that you've used in your products and keeping records of the evaluations and communications. It's important to do due diligence when launching any new hardware products. Look at the suppliers you're working with, see if they have any pending litigation or judgments against them. See if other people are complaining about them in the marketplace, whether they're paying their debts or not. Talk to people who have dealt with them. Look at any complaints about the quality of the products and look to see if they actually have the licenses that they claim to have. And it's important to have a quality control program put in place at the beginning so you can monitor and maintain the product consistency and safety. To keep thorough records of the risk assessments and testing results and quality control procedures. And this can help show that you are acting in good faith, taking reasonable steps, and that there was no intentional misconduct if there's any problems later on. So it's also important to make sure that you have product liability insurance in place when you're putting out new products in case there are any big problems that arise.
Thank you, Raza. And so both of you touched on components and interactions with those. So Shauna you also touched on components too. So perhaps you could elucidate a little bit as to what type of components you're referring to when it comes to this system and the risks that could be involved.
Yeah, so when I talk about components with hardware, I'm really talking about the finished hardware product, which is related to the raw materials that you use. But I like to stress that it's really important to test the finished product when it comes to risk assessment and the safety of the product that the consumer is going to get. And kind of touching on something that Jillian mentioned earlier about the shelf life. Well, it's really, really important to test your product over time. If you put an extract in a piece of hardware and then you send it to the lab and it gets tested 3 days later, that's not representative of what the consumer is going to inhale 2 months, 3 months, etc. from now. And so we see that over time, metals are going to continue to leach into the extract because cannabinoids and terpenes are very caustic, that it's just a natural phenomenon. It's unavoidable, but it's really important to understand, are those levels still within regulated safe limits over time sitting on the shelf?
And just a quick second that I couldn't agree more with shelf stability testing over time. Invest in the time, invest in the product, each of your ingredients, each of your hardware over time with a trusted lab, and get those results and keep those results very close.
And Julian, I see your head nodding a bunch there. You want to chime in?
Yeah, I think this is an important area when we're talking about hardware for the industry to strive to go beyond what regulations ask for, because I'm going to generalize here, but hardware generally is not very well regulated in states. And there are a lot of reasons for that, not the least of which is that, there are usually different agencies over tobacco and nicotine products than over cannabis. The hardware can often overlap and be the same. And a lot of states just haven't sort of figured out how to move forward in regulating hardware. And there's no federal regulation. So we have some states that are doing some small things. Hawaii, for example, the heating element has to be made of inert materials. We've got a couple other states that do that. Cannabis shouldn't touch the coils, and there's a pre-approval process in Ohio. We have a few things like that, but this is really an area where I think there's a lot of potential risk, and the regulations alone are probably not going to protect you from consumer safety issues. So my advice would be go beyond the regulations.
Thank you, Julian. You gave me an opportunity for a shameless plug for ASTM International's Technical Committee D37 on cannabis and Subcommittee D3708 on personal and household use cannabis devices and appliances, where I'm working with Shauna and many others to help create hopefully those tools and those guidance mechanisms, best practices, specifications, test methods, classifications for stuff, maybe even terminology. So we're all kind of saying the same thing, and we are all speaking the same language. That seems to be even hard nowadays. But these will hopefully be tools that industry can leverage to go beyond those regulations that don't exist currently. And maybe if we do our due diligence and help with risk mitigation, perhaps they can even be used as a framework to structure new regulations from. So with that, I think it's a great opportunity to transition to some of the risks now, specifically related to ingredient considerations. And so with that, Shauna, I'm going to let you keep kind of going on your soapbox for a second, because it's really important for us to really consider those risks. And Jillian, I'd love to hear your perspectives there as well, kind of where regulators, where their heads are at. But Shauna, maybe you could just give us an overview of, different things when we're talking about, in our work, what are some of the things we stress about?
Absolutely. So I think the EVALI crisis in 2019 really shed light on the fact that not everything is safe to inhale. It may be safe to ingest, but that doesn't mean it's going to safe to inhale, because oral and inhalation are very different in your body. So it's really important to remember that. So when we're talking about risk assessment for ingredients, it's a pretty lengthy, in-depth process that entails, you pick an ingredient of choice, you go on the internet and you search for as much scientific papers on it, regulatory limits, any data you can find on that compound of interest. And then based on what the data says, like ideally you can find a research paper that was about inhalation and long-term study, but that's oftentimes not what you're going to find. So instead, what we have to do is use these extrapolation toxicology methods that can take data that's maybe from an oral study and then extrapolate it into what would that mean for inhalation. And then after you do that whole process, you end up with a concentration limit. And then that is what you can use when you're formulating and developing your products. So it takes a lot of time. It can definitely be done. And we're working on writing standards so that anyone can do it. You don't have to be a trained toxicologist to go through this process. And you can absolutely hire a toxicologist, consult with them as well to help you in this. But so that's kind of like the basis of like what a risk assessment is when we're talking about ingredient choice.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And Jillian, please, we'd love to learn more. I mean, I'm sure regulators are really trying to wrap their head around this as well.
Yeah, I was going to say this is maybe the area most impacted by the lack of federal agency engagement. So usually we would have federal agencies that would be telling state regulators, this is a safe ingredient, this is not a safe ingredient. What we have is an imperfect operation of that. So we have some states that say ingredients have to meet GRAS certification. GRAS is for food, it's not for aerosolized products. We have some states using the inert, inactive ingredient database from FDA. That's for drugs. There's no drug delivery device that aerosolizes like a vape device. So those are proxies that states are using, but they're imperfect for measuring the risk that your product on the industry side and for consumers will actually have. We also then have
on that point, I know it can be quite difficult for manufacturers to comply with all these different state laws and to follow them. A lot of them are changing quickly, and there's just so many of them. So the lack of federal regulation here has been an issue for the industry, and it'll be interesting to see what happens on that point if it is moved to Schedule 3 or some other schedule other than Schedule 1 or descheduled altogether. That would give the federal government then jurisdiction to come in and regulate in this space when it hasn't done so in the past, because with a Schedule 1 controlled substance, it's just illegal, period, under federal law. So it'll be interesting if it is rescheduled, descheduled, what the new federal regulatory landscape will look like. It will provide one path for everyone to follow, but it could also be extremely burdensome to the extent that they're regulated like pharmaceutical products. It could be a big change adjusting to the new federal standards, but we're likely going to be see changes coming up soon with the rescheduling discussion that's going on.
Yeah, so lack of federal agency engagement here has really impacted things. States are using their own scientists in many cases to review their own data, to look at things on their own. We've seen states prohibit a number of excipients and diluents based on their own data from the vaping lung injury outbreak and their scientific review. We've seen states take different positions on sources of ingredients, botanically derived terpenes, cannabis or hemp derived terpenes. Again, I think we're missing the body of science to suggest where safety is there. Regulators have struggled to know the ingredients in proprietary formulas and have had to find workarounds to be able to assure compliance with that. And then we've seen at least one state, Colorado, propose emissions testing to actually look at what's in the aerosol. And there's some lab barriers to that, a need for more facilities to do that. But I think we're seeing states try to be really innovative to protect consumers here in the face of a lack of engagement federally on this.
Perfect segue there, Jillian. We had a question come through in the Q&A related to, extractables and leachables and testing heavy metals, now versus, 6 months from now, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line, right? So James, maybe that is like what you were touching on earlier about doing more product safety testing. Maybe you could expand upon that a bit. Maybe, but I didn't mean to jump in if you had something else you wanted to touch on too.
No worries. Could definitely touch on that. We absolutely ran that within our extended, product shelf analysis testing. It's very important to us to know that we're not putting those ingredients in with our formulations, since it is, proprietary formulations, and each of those, as Sean said, interacts in a very unique way. It absolutely does make a difference, and to show that, again, that's an above and beyond step for a lot of things. To Jillian's point, the states. Individual state regulatory structures around ingredients and additives are all over the place. We're a multi-state brand in 12 different markets. It's like whack-a-mole. And one thing I think we mentioned in a previous webinar was the rules also change. You have a set of people who've been working in, say, a regulatory agency in a state, and upon a new regime change, they're replaced. Everybody changes over. So it's a re-education process. For us with the product manufacturers, it's just so essential to keep an open dialogue with our regulators and our friends there to say, hey, who's changed? Or if we hear, hey, we have a whole new science department. We don't know what we didn't get that last packet of memo from a thing. Can you guys come and explain it to us again? And being very active and ready to fly out on a moment's notice to go meet with these regulators has really helped us explain our product and explain our risk assessment and develop these procedures. In different states, some states have rules around terpenes that are only found in cannabinoids. What does that mean? And some states say no flavors. What is a flavor versus an added terpene? Some say you can't add any terpenes. Some say only hemp-derived terpenes are okay, and then we have to ask, why in there. So it's a patchwork approach, but again, having those scientific testing results and having those extended testing results, and having to Jillian's point, one of the things that's up and coming is a vaporizer emissions testing. We required it here in Colorado. We jumped the gun a little early, and our labs weren't quite ready for it. I work very closely with our labs here, and I'm very, very good friends with them, and enjoy to and work with them. But we've had some success out of Canada as well. We've had one of the guys who's actually in the attendees currently has done some extensive testing and some beautiful white paper work on emissions and things around that nature, and really dialing down to where does the risk fall within those and what is producing those type of things, and hope to have that released in a big way here very soon.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Really appreciate that. Yeah, Josh, if you get the last word here, and then we're going to move on to our next topic.
Sure. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of add on some of the stuff that Jillian was speaking about, and a little bit, Sean at the beginning as well, and just sort of the need for, national oversight and regulation. We've seen so many challenges from our end, and I just wanted to kind of, anecdotally kind of speak to a few of them in particular. I remember a number of years ago when heavy metals, first became, a major topic. I went out to California, spent a few weeks there with every lab, and we actually did a sort of our own kind of like dummy test, I'll call it, where we got the same cartridges filled with the exact same extract and brought it to 3 different labs. And the results that we see, you would not believe the discrepancy in the results from 3 different labs on the exact same extract, the exact same hardware. And so just sort of, from an early days, taught us or showed us the need for regulation, right? So not only to have all these different testing, but then also the oversight to make sure that these labs are doing things consistently in a right way. We've also seen a number of different labs, and someone spoke about it earlier. If you're getting your stuff tested, in 2 days or 3 days, it's not representing what's happening in market. And we've seen, in my experience, in the last number of years, most brands and a lot of labs, they've found a way to get around the regulations and get products to pass, as opposed to really trying to drive the industry forward in terms of safety and regulation. And then the last piece I just wanted to add to that, because it's also been touched on, and it's a huge piece that I'm super passionate about, James just touched on at the end, is the need for emissions testing and how badly that's needed. I think, the leachability testing was a great first measure, but, as Shauna mentioned, there's a huge difference between ingestion, and inhalation, right? And these different methods. And I think there's such a need and a gap right now for the emission testing to really ultimately push this industry forward and make sure that we've got the best, safest products possible for end users. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Well, thank you, Josh, because that actually is a great transition into another lively discussion about what legal considerations we should be having, because all I hear is liability. Lots of concerns for product manufacturers and potentially hardware manufacturers alike in regards to how their devices are being used, right? If the way they're supposed to be or not. And in regards to product manufacturers, right? Considering that we're all contributing to the largest consumer safety trial, that exists, really, right? We're all just enjoying these products, hoping that they're safe. So I was thinking maybe Raza, you could dive in a little bit to because Shauna just touched on it, right? That there's a lot of reaction chemistry going on inside these devices, right? We have a lot of unknowns that are there. So what are some of those considerations, those concerns, those, legal risks, right, of unknowingly selling a dangerous product to the marketplace? What should our operators be aware of?
So there's always going to be some uncertainty and risk in this type of activity, but the important thing is to have documentation and records showing that you've taken the reasonable steps that you can to comply. Records showing the product development, the manufacturing processes that you have, the testing and the quality control measures. This can be critical later on to show that you did your due diligence if a liability claim arises later on. But also looking at all of the different regulations. It takes some time, like we discussed. There's different jurisdictions with different standards, different labeling standards, safety standards. But it's important to look at the federal, state, and local regulations to see that you put in place some procedures and policies to address them. Obviously, child-resistant packaging, that's important to prevent against claims that minors are using these products. Age verification for online sales, making sure you have the proper safety warnings, usage instructions that are clear and prominent. and having a recall procedure in case there is a problem. There's a plan in case a safety issue is identified, so you can communicate the issue to the customers promptly and provide guidance on how to return or dispose of the products. And then some kind of system to monitor the products in the market for safety and quality. So if there is a problem, it can be addressed quickly. But just in general, ways to achieve this from a legal perspective, have an attorney early on, either draft or review your business structure, your policies, your disclosure to licensing authorities. Just the act of having legal counsel involved can help you if you get in regulatory trouble later on, and that you can show that any violations were not intentional and you took reasonable steps to achieve compliance. There are a lot of bad actors in this industry who are knowingly conducting illegal and fraudulent activity. And if you can stand out just by showing that you care about compliance and you're trying to do things the right way. And as I mentioned before, from a legal perspective, it helps to just reach out to the regulators, develop a good rapport. A lot of times they're more approachable than you might think, that they're happy to pick up the phone and have a dialogue. And a lot of times the regulators might approach the issues differently than you'll see just from the written regulations. They'll have particular processes, issues that they care about. They can advise you on how to interpret any ambiguities. A lot of times these regulations can be confusing. And the dialogue is especially important, I've found, when dealing with local regulators. A lot of times they don't have the same experience and expertise as people working in the state government. So it's important to just keep that dialogue open with them, keep a relationship in good faith, and show that you're trying to do things the right way.
Awesome. Thank you. Actually, James Brainwaves, I was going to ask you about, some of your thoughts on how we can mitigate some of our legal liability in industry as operators as well.
Well, one thing to follow up on what Ross just said is this has been something that I've been beating the door down since the early days of extraction wizardry. There was a time and a place when a lot of these process procedures were considered garage wizard alchemic science, and everything was hidden away behind closed doors. And one of the things I've been very, very proud of in the development of this industry and taking part of is ripping the doors open and welcoming in our regulators and explaining to them what we're doing before we're doing it. And not looking them as an enemy. It baffles my mind to go in different regulatory areas to say, no, let's lock the door and keep the regulators out, turn off the lights, pretend like we're not here, kind of stuff. That's ridiculous. You should be friends with our regulators, should be opening the doors to them, because then within product development, within that, we can say, hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z. And they go, great, have you thought of X, Y, and Z? That's what we're looking for. And we go, thank you. That's going to save us a huge headache down the road once we've invested our time, energy, and product to say, well, actually, you can't do that because of this technicality, or yes, you can, but you need to, explain that to us, or can you run some testing and give us some information? Again, it just boils down to a very simple thought of risk with regulatory structure to say, welcome them in, join them and have them join your process. They're excited to learn. They want to be there to protect public safety. And as good actors in the industry, we absolutely need them on our side and working with us to say, what is the future and how can we make this, palatable and reduce risk.
Awesome. Yeah, Shauna, please dive in and transition us. And we're going to end the whole rest of the session, just deep dive regulatory considerations and all that type of fun stuff. So yeah, bring us into that.
Yeah, so from like a science point of view, when we're talking about like unknowns and liability and risk and consumers and all that stuff, in like toxicology world, when we're performing risk assessments, we try to encompass what's called like 95% of users, because we can't cover 100% of users because there's always that extreme consumer. So we do like the 95% consumer calculations. And then also when we're talking about unknowns, there's this thing called the TTC, which is the threshold of toxicological concern. And what that is at a certain concentration, anything below that, no matter what the compound is, it's going to be like negligible risk to the consumer. So if you have like an unknown, but it's a low enough concentration, you don't need to perform like the full risk assessment on that. Now, I don't know how that would transfer to like policy or legal side, but I thought it would be interesting to give like the scientific perspective of like, we try not to completely eliminate risk. We try not to consider 100% of consumers because that's just not realistic.
And from a legal perspective, I just wanted to add also that it's important to look at the labels and marketing of these products before they go to market. Different states have different rules. For example, California has Proposition 65 that you can get sued for even minor technical deviations from the Prop 65 warning. So it's important to look at the states where you're selling to and pull up the cannabis statutes, regulations, and look at what they say about the labeling requirements. Also, some states classify cannabis vaping products as e-cigarettes, which are have certain regulations that apply to nicotine vaping products.
Sure.
Look at
Yeah.
those rules. Also, the structure, function, and health claims, that's been an issue that cannabis companies have faced sometimes. The FDA has sent out warning letters, but it's important to not be making specific health claims about the products. It's better to focus on things like temporary states or emotions, or vague and subjective claims, because if you make claims that the products can have various health benefits, you can get yourself in trouble for making misrepresentations, both from the FDA. California district attorneys have gone after some of these companies, and also consumers could bring actions for making misleading statements. So it's important before we put something out, just have an attorney or someone give it a good look, make sure it's compliant. Also look at other marketing rules that may apply. For example, in California, it's illegal to give away cannabis products for free, but you can charge 1 penny. There are certain rules about marketing and certain media in California. You're not allowed to do so if it has a certain percentage of children accessing that media, and you're supposed to have statistics to back that up. So just take a look at the beginning at the marketing, advertising, labeling regulations, and just give it a look to make sure that your product complies before you put it out there.
Yeah, all good points, Raza, for sure. And maybe Jillian, you could maybe bring us home by just sinking our ship a little bit and talking about some of the major regulatory considerations that we should be aware of, so we can help maybe mitigate some of that future risk.
Yeah, and I'm going to get big picture because I think we've talked about all the major regulatory risks. I really think we've hit on all the things that regulators are thinking of. And as has been mentioned several times, states are trying different policy approaches here. Just a reminder, your regulator often doesn't make the policy, your state legislature does. But regulators are also trying to provide guidance to protect consumers. The big picture thing that I want to leave people with is, in the wake of the vaping lung injury outbreak, I think what we saw is that one outbreak impacts the entire industry. So there's an onus on the industry to raise everybody up. It's not enough to have some responsible actors and some that aren't, because the ones that aren't could cause major repercussions for the entire industry. And I worry a lot about this with the cannabinoid hemp products we see as well. Not to take us totally off base here, but consumer safety is at the heart of what every regulatory agency is focused on. And regulatory agencies in the wake of the vaping lung injury outbreak put a lot in place for cannabis. The recall processes that a regulatory agency has at their disposal could very quickly take the product that's causing the issue off the market and not impact the whole industry. But we don't have those things for hemp in most cases. Cannabinoid hemp products are not being regulated in the same way. An outbreak would be much harder to sort of suss out. It would be much harder to recall. And so I think that's the message that I would want to leave folks in the industry with, is anything you can do to raise the standards of the entire industry through association work, through webinars like this, through technical assistance, peer-to-peer, I think is really important. And hopefully we'll have federal agencies engaging in some way, shape, or form to set minimum standards across the board for cannabinoids as well.
Yeah. So, and I know, Jillian, you probably get tons of questions, right? What should industry be aware of and concern with, like, when we're like thinking about what you do to us, right? But what do regulators actually think when you guys get something wrong? Like, how do you guys actually do internal risk assessments of, I guess, your own operations?
That's a lot of why CANRA exists. It's to help regulators learn from each other and understand where there've been, where there've been incidences in states that could have been prevented, and it's a safe space for regulators to share that. And I do think we see a lot of copy and paste of good things, whereas in the early days it was sort of a copy and paste of anything because there was nothing. Now we have so many states that there's starting to be a lot more copy and paste of good things. But I mean, regulatory agencies care deeply about consumer safety, and at the end of the day, whatever you think of the regulations, most of them are there to try to protect consumers. So again, as has been said, please engage with your regulatory agency in the states that you operate in. Share with them what you're seeing that can help inform regulations, and share with them where you think regulations aren't appropriate for what you're seeing, because that's an important learning as well.
Awesome. I really do appreciate those perspectives. And so, we've got a little bit of time. I want to just make sure we address some of these awesome questions that came in through the chat that we have. There was one question that came in from Mitchell Colbert, and he was saying that given, and this is for everybody here, but given the history of the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, do you feel something similar happening to the cannabis vape companies? Do you think something similar could happen to cannabis vape companies? Sorry. And for those who may not be aware what the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement is, which I'm not, perhaps maybe Mitchell, you could inform us in the chat.
Or I can jump in. So
please.
Because I spent decades in tobacco prevention control, the master settlement was a legal action, a judicial action that led to a legal action taken against the tobacco industry for basically for racketeering, for lying to consumers about what was in their products, about the effects of their products, for other egregious acts. And that resulted in the legislation that created FDA's Center for Tobacco Products. So there is no Center for Cannabinoid Products at FDA right now, regardless of whether you might want one or not. And I think the vaping products for cannabinoids are being treated very differently. There are a lot of reasons for that. First of all, nicotine is water soluble. THC and cannabinoids are not. So the ingredients that are going into these products are very different. It is not just a copy paste of what the Center for Tobacco Products does for nicotine and non-nicotine vape delivery devices. It's a different set of issues. And then not to mention the Schedule I designation of marijuana and the problems that that's presenting in terms of federal agencies engaging. But I think if the industry wants to prevent something like a master settlement, the best thing you can do is try to be super responsible in protecting consumers. All of the things that were talked about today, risk mitigation on your products, fair and full board communication with consumers about the products, how to use the products, what the risks of the products might be. That's all really important. And that's not what we saw in the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry lied about the health events that they were aware of and were seeing, instead of trying to correct and re-engineer the product.
And on this point, I think it's also important to keep in mind that the risks of smoking tobacco products are astronomically higher than the risks of vaping, whether it's cannabis vaping or nicotine vaping. I think the public a lot of times misperceives this because there are these public health campaigns about vaping that kind of sometimes exaggerate the risks and don't really explain to people how they compare to the risks of other activities like smoking. But I think it's important for the vaping industry to stress the relative safety of the vaping compared to other types of activities, but also to be honest and upfront about what those risks are. Don't try to bury them and pretend like they don't exist. But just being honest and talking about the risks in a way that people can understand, I think can avoid getting into a situation where there's litigation and settlement agreements involving the vaping industry.
Yeah, and to clarify, the master settlement happened in 1998, 99, way before vaping technology. So it had to do with combusted tobacco. Cigarettes were really at aim there. So completely agree that smoking nicotine, vaping nicotine has different considerations than cannabis for sure. But I think from an industry sort of lesson and takeaway, the more responsible you can be, the more risk mitigation you can do, the less likely you are to have a judicial action that leads to something like that.
Great, absolutely. And so we have one last question that came in, and I think it's a hardware question. So Josh, I'm going to field it over to you, but it's about extended producer responsibility laws, and to start to include those to, cannabis vapes. We have a large waste problem, right? And so just wondering what your perspectives are in regards to having these laws potentially impacting cannabis product manufacturers and even hardware manufacturers, and how that the liability related to the waste that we're producing, that our industry produces.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that really definitely strikes a chord with me. It's something I've been very close to since my beginning here at Green Tank, over 6 years ago. We sort of address it and answer it by saying, we would love to see some major innovation and progress as it relates to the waste. I think probably most of us can agree it's one of the biggest challenges and issues right now in the current vape space, especially as it relates to all-in-one devices, and the amount of waste there is associated with that. We've been trying to, for many years, think of creative solutions and different ways to help, mitigate that and reduce that. And quite frankly, it's been very challenging. Mostly, just being on the cost prohibitive side. A lot of solutions that we've looked at or that we've, sort of proposed or tried to experiment with, it's nice in theory, but when it comes down to someone actually paying for it, right, or kind of taking the extra effort and going out of their way to actually properly get rid of something or recycle something, most brands just aren't willing to go to the full extent that they need to right now. But I do think we will see more and more pressure on everyone, on brands, on vape producers, et cetera. And I hope retail as well. And if we all come together, to me, this is one of those areas where I think regulations can also help drive innovation a little bit. By having some better regulations as it relates to waste, we'll come up with some really creative, product designs and solutions and options for waste reduction. And that's something that really excites me. So to me, it's it's an exciting challenge, as opposed to sort of looking at it from maybe a glass half empty perspective. I get excited about what that might bring to the industry and how that can help continue to improve things and drive things forward.
Awesome. No, Josh, thank you. That's elucidating a lot of great information. So James, you get the last word to talk about, to round us out, and then we're going to close up our session with our rapid fire.
Sure. Just to answer Morgan's question a little more detailed, it's and I'm sorry to hear that brands are not answering. It's as responsible brands, we always have people on staff ready to address these things. In fact, it's one of our biggest things we bring to our weekly and monthly meetings to show the engagement of our consumers and their interest in that, to make sure that we're educating consumers correctly. Definitely go and talk to your bud tenders and say, who's shown you schematics of their product? Who is there talking and who is there saying that is their key focus, that is their thing? Vapes shouldn't be it's such an intensive product that needs so much work, research, and science, that if it's a flippant secondary product that a producer is just like, oh, by the way, we're selling vapes too, maybe look for ones that are passionate, who devote themselves to that vape category and can speak to that on a highly scientific level. And the education piece to the bud tender is absolutely most important. If we could be in a pop-up in every store, we would definitely be, but it's our job to educate those bud tenders to be speaking for and to the health benefits and to inform the consumer. That was all for me.
Awesome, James. Really appreciate it. So that's our time, everyone. Thank you all for being with us and hanging out for just a little extra couple of minutes. So we're going to do this session. We've been closing out with some rapid fires, which have been really cute and awesome. So we also have this great outro panel poll at the same time that we're really hoping you guys can respond to. And so we'll muse from those as we have some time. But thank you all so much again. And all right. For all the panelists, right? Don't think about it too hard. Whatever just pops in your head, right? It's a litmus test. So, and I recognize, Jillian, right? You can't necessarily speak for Canra and everything like that. But hey, if you have a personal opinion about something, feel free to chime in. If not, no worries. All right. So this one's going to be controversial for all the people on the call. All right. So 510 or an all-in-one?
For temperature control, all-in-one.
Oh, all right. All right. Don't think about it too hard. Come on. It's all good. All right. That one's a good one. All right. How about this one? Probably a little easier. How about, what do you prefer? Live resin or live rosin?
Live rosin.
Rosin.
Oh, rosin. All right. Rosin. All right. For our terpene producers out there or enthusiasts, how about this? What do you think? Botanical terps or synthetic terps?
Well, they
Manufacturing.
can be the same thing.
Yes, agreed.
Terps are terps.
Yep. Chemical's a chemical.
All right. How about this, Raza? This one might be up for you. What's a bigger risk, liability or fraud?
I would say liability, just because there's so many different potential bases, and there's a complex web of sometimes conflicting local, state, and federal laws. So fraud, there's still some bad actors out there, but there are less of them, and you can do your due diligence to prevent that.
Love it. Love it. All right. Hardware manufacturers, nichrome versus stainless steel wires.
Ooh, putting me on the spot here. I'll go nichrome.
All right. All right. Okay. So when we're making our formulations here, what do we like? We like fruity flavors or cannabis flavors?
Fruity.
Fruity.
Ooh, all right, fruity flavors. All right, not necessarily ones that attract children. No.
Oh,
Just fruity.
Adults like fruit too. We gotta have responsible adult choice here at a 21-year-old plus thing.
All right,
Adults
and
like flavors.
I see Brian's face popping up, so he's probably giving me the time here to nix it. Oh, he's saying we're good. Okay, well, we'll keep rolling. We've only got a few more. All right, reschedule or deschedule?
Deschedule, but states without regulatory structures need to have it. So I understand the Schedule 3 will work to deschedule.
I would say deschedule as well. Rescheduling would put this into the pharmaceutical industry with a whole complex web of federal laws and regulations that it may be difficult for many cannabis companies to comply with.
Love it. Love it. Josh is another one. Low ball, hopefully. Disposable vapes or recyclable vapes?
Recyclable. That's an easy one for me.
All right. And for everybody, who are we supporting? Are we supporting MSOs or are we supporting craft operators?
There's space for both.
Everybody. Let's build everybody up.
Love it. I love it. Right. Tide raises all things, right? However that goes. Okay. And who's jazzed about trade shows? I don't know. MJ Biz, or are we going to MJ Unpacked?
MJ Biz.
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 All right, Biz. Okay, I see how it is. All right. And those who like your cannabis scenes, are we East Coast or are we West Coast?
West Coast.
West Coast, that's where it all started.
Hard for me to say as a Toronto boy born and raised, but West Coast.
All right. Okay. Last and not least. Okay. How are we feeling about celebrity endorsements? Do we want them or can we leave them?
If you want them, go for it. I mean, I think that the product should speak for itself.
I would say only when they're genuine.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. This has been really great. I'm hoping everyone learned something from this webinar series. I'm really excited about our next two, and you guys will definitely stay tuned for the Dabinar. That one is going to be super fun. But until then, live long and process.
Oh, fantastic. I always struggle to follow up live long and process. I absolutely love that, Darwin. Thank you, Darwin, as always, for expertly moderating today's conversation. Huge and special thank you and shout out to Jillian Shower, the Executive Director of Cannabis Regulators Association, specifically for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule, working with all of these nationwide regulators to ensure that we have this patchwork, to ensure that we move on from this patchwork of regulations and frameworks from across the country. So really appreciate your contributions on the regulators' perspective today. And then huge thank you as well to all the members of NCIA's Cannabis Manufacturing Committee and our panel today, James Granger, Josh Boridan, Shauna Varicki, Raza Lawrence, and Carla Rodriguez, who's been was the moderator for episode 2 and has been joining us and assisting with the Q&A throughout today's program off camera. As Darwin did make mention, before all of you all leave, I'll try and get through all of these upcoming activities we'd love to get all of your all's participation with as quickly as possible, while we're hopefully getting some additional responses to that outro poll. And then, as always, feel free to stick around for the next few minutes, engage with the panelists inside of the chat room, and send any contact information or follow up to any fellow audience members as well. As Darwin mentioned, we will be hosting episodes 4 and 5 at a still to be determined determined date in the first or second weeks of December after the sort of trade show season winds down. So hope to see all of you all and actively participating at MJ BizCon. NCIA's team will be on the ground as well, participating in a number of activities throughout that week, and hopefully winning an award for the Trade and Advocacy Association of the Year at the MJs this year. So stay on the lookout for more information as we lead into that amazing activity later this month. And then following up on Canada's involvement with today's episode of our Industry Essentials webinar series, we will be hosting the second edition and October version of our new Illuminating Policy Matters webinar series. This specifically, we are partnering with Canada in particular to feature a revolving cast of currently sitting and active regulators providing their perspective on both federal and state issues. This month, we're thrilled to be joined by one of the preeminent minds and cannabis scholars in the industry and now active director of the Office of Maine Cannabis Policy, John Kudak. He'll be joining our co-host and policy co-chairs, Khurshid Khoja and Michael Cooper, alongside our Director of Government Relations, Michelle Rutter-Freeberg, to dive into the recent rescheduling recommendations from the HHS and how that will potentially impact the evolution of the federal market and the current adult use marketplace that's thriving in the state of Maine. So if you want to be pre-registered for that session, feel free to respond to question 4 in the outro poll, and we'd love to have all of you all join us for that session as well. All right. And then additionally, I saw a number of you all indicated that you were or were not members. I think it was about 30-70 at the beginning of today's session. Please do know that right now we're in one of our fall and winter application periods for one of NCIA's 14 member-led committees. There's not any opportunity throughout the year to really join NCIA and take your involvement with the industry to the next level. As all of you all saw here, NCIA's member-led committees are your key to joining NCIA and really taking an active role in developing policy positions, educational content, as you saw with these webinars, as well as industry reports and really vital resources that are used by regulators such as members of the Cannabis Regulators Association to influence their policy decisions nationwide. Our application window is running now through November 10th. So feel free to head to NCIA's website. We just got a blog posted up earlier this morning that outlines the process and all of the amazing activities that you can take part in as a committee member, and then how you can either join or apply if you're a current NCIA member already. And then additionally, do mark your calendars for our next edition of our in-person Lobby Day event taking place next May, the 16th through the 18th. We already have over 35 member businesses signed on to support and participate in that amazing advocacy-focused event. So you can head to NCIA's website today as well to learn more about all of the amazing activities at that 3-day long event and sign up to join as a member, as membership is a requirement to contribute to these efforts. And then if you haven't seen the announcements over the last few weeks, we are really excited to get back on the road for some in-person educational and networking activities next year, from the end of February through the beginning of April, all sort of leading up and culminating with our in-person 7th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days in DC. So mark your calendars for these events that are taking place across Missouri, California, Colorado, and Maryland. And we look forward to seeing all of you all there. And then last but not least, we do have a number of monthly member orientation sessions taking place throughout the remainder of the year. Mark your calendars now for the 3rd week of November and December. Register today for your team so you can learn how to maximize your membership directly with one of NCIA's membership directors on a virtual date. All right. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. As always, this has been an incredibly informative and engaging session as we explored the critical intersection of risk assessment integrity in policy in episode 3 of our vape-focused Industry Essentials webinar series. Stay tuned for more details surrounding the date and times for episodes 4 and 5. And again, just want to extend my heartfelt thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their expertise and our audience for your insightful questions today. You can stay connected with NCIA to continue your engagement in the cannabis and hemp sectors. And as I said, keep an eye out for all the remaining upcoming programs throughout November and December. We appreciate your participation and dedication to advancing the industry. As always, we'll leave you with this end of event credit sequence that highlights the 50+ member businesses that participated in today's session, and as always, drive our organization's mission forward. With that, thank you all so much, and we hope to see you all later this week for the October edition of Policy Matters on Thursday, October 26th at 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much, and until then, have a great one.